So we're going to do something else today, the first day of 2020. It's been done one other time, and I didn't know this until I finished this essay. It's on Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Many of my listeners understand the red pill when it comes to intergender relationships. And now that distinction, the so-called alpha-beta distinction among males, really only makes sense in a revolutionary society, sexual revolutionary society. Prior to the sexual revolution in the West, you did have so-called sexual liberation amongst the elite in other places. And this is why the red pill can be applied to elite society in other parts of the world. There's few more blatant examples of this alpha-beta distinction, as in Tolstoy's work, which came out in 1877, 1878. Anna Karenina herself is a physical beauty by all standards. Now, her age isn't mentioned, but she does have a brother, Stepan, who's 34. The alpha is represented by Alexei Vronsky, very wealthy, dashing, handsome. He's a military man. And the article, the very, very brief article by Troy Francis in 2014 deals with this very briefly. But I'm going to go into far more detail as to how this novel brings out some of the most significant issues in relationship between men and women. But for those of you who don't know, women generally divide men between alphas and betas. Whether they use the term or not, it doesn't matter. So the former, the alpha, is very confident, very attractive for all sorts of reasons. And maybe they make up 15% of the population, male population. And this is the small group of men that women go after, meaning that competition among attractive women is absolutely fierce. Remember, the alpha isn't necessarily attractive, wealthy, or muscular, but he's necessarily confident and experienced. They're not even financially successful or in good shape in some cases. But in Anna Karenina, Vronsky is all of these. The key issue is that the alpha male has lots of romantic options. And because of that, they tend to be emotionally inaccessible, and that makes them all the more attractive. The beta males are the backbone of any society. These are providers of material goods or emotional stability. They provide something the female lacks and alphas can't give. The significance here is that women need them, but don't really want them. They're far more dependable than alphas because they have a poor history with women, and they're absolutely overjoyed at the idea that an attractive woman wants them after being rejected by them for so long. Their excitement and eagerness to please suggests to women that they have few romantic options. And since they don't have options, they're inherently less attractive. Other women don't find them worthwhile. Options and the confidence it brings are really the sole general distinction between the two types of men. Now, the source of this confidence is a bit of a mystery. But to put it simply, men are either James Bond on the one hand or Will Ferrell on the other, without a whole lot in between. And they're mutually exclusive. You can't be both at the same time. Women need the beta males for utilitarian reasons. They need the alphas for validation. An attractive woman with options needs to marry the beta. She has very little choice. But if she can get away with it, she will seek out the company of the alpha, which means that adultery is built in to the very postmodern concept of marriage. Women marry the men that they need, not the man they want. Women will give the alpha, though, her utter best in all respects, doing everything she can to please him. And she'll take the beta for granted, knowing that he doesn't have many places to go. And he lets her get away with this because, again, he has few options. His lack of experience makes him blind to any warning sign. So the alpha-beta distinction, of course, dictates almost all relations between men and women, romantically and sexually, in the post-sexual revolutionary West. It's an empirically verifiable fact that those men who do well with women tend to get more of them, because there must be something about this guy. He must be worthwhile if all the women are after him. You kind of wonder sometimes why that is, because often it's not obvious, but it certainly exists. So when a woman refers to men, that, men lie or men cheat or men are afraid of commitment or something like that, she's not referring to the ordinary man. When she uses the word man, she's only referring to alphas. And they are afraid of commitment because they have too many options. Why are they going to commit in that case? The beta male says, well, I love commitment. But that just proves that they don't get it. He's not technically a man in this vocabulary. His commitment comes from his lack of options rather than any kind of heartfelt devotion. And betas can be dangerous. Underneath their well-rehearsed harmlessness lies a certain hatred, and it may even be justified. They see their crush getting whatever she wants because she's beautiful, while, he works constantly for far less. And this is legitimate resentment, because a beautiful woman gets pretty much whatever she wants. And of course, in any relationship between some kind of a beta and an attractive woman, the power is always going to be with the woman, because she can get into another relationship in a matter of hours, while the guy may take years. Betas, though, are the backbone of any society. They're virtuous, they're hardworking. It's not meant as an insult at all. But it's because they're dependable, they're boring. And this division is absolutely essential. It's the foundation of adultery. It's the reason that marriage is falling apart. The woman has to marry the beta, but she doesn't like him. How often do you hear wives making fun of their husbands? A beta is always a downgrade for any woman above average. But she needs the beta. Unlike the alpha, he won't run out on her when she has babies. And this is why the beta today is alienated from marriage, and that can only spell doom for the society. And again, this distinction really didn't exist en masse until the sexual revolution of the late 60s, where the dating market became unregulated. And again, when it became deregulated, women could do what they want. There are few restrictions on the sex drive, especially the female. All the attractive women went for that top 10% of men. And they got more than they could handle, while the rest of men were kind of in the wilderness. So when I say it's unregulated, I mean it's just there's no arranged marriages and there's just few constraints on sexual activity. Now, since the male sex drive is far stronger and harder to satisfy, and women are the gatekeepers of sexual access, that means an unregulated sexual market is inherently gynocentric. Any decent-looking woman doesn't really value sex that much because it's so readily available. Same thing goes for compliments and flattery, anything else. They get it constantly. Something that's that plentiful doesn't have much value. The only exception is, of course, relationships with an alpha male. Then sex becomes very valuable. But for most of history, alpha-beta status hasn't been significant. No one married for looks and that ephemeral, fleeting feeling of love or something like that. Breaking down social restrictions didn't free anything. It only permitted the lower drives free rein. It benefited attractive women and the alpha males only. Now, the other key concept of the red pill is hypergamy. This is one of the central vocabulary terms. And it deals with the fact that every attractive woman wants to marry up or be in a relationship that goes up above her present station in one way or another. This is, of course, intrinsic, and this is a primal drive. It's not even measurable, and they might not even be aware of it. But they're always wondering, is this the best I can do? And there's people like Rollo Tomasi would say, the existential fear of a woman is to end up marrying a man that's far beneath what she can do, that she knows she can do better, but married a guy for all the wrong reasons. Now, this is a simple and reductionist theory, but it is easily verifiable. All social concepts like this ignore a lot of complexity. One thing that this theory ignores is female self-esteem, which rarely comes up. The other issue, of course, is the cause of male confidence. We all know alpha males, and I could tell you that they have nothing in common with each other. Some of them aren't even attractive. Some of them don't have money, but they certainly have a tremendous amount of confidence that comes with all that experience. Confidence is distributed a lot like money is. It goes to those who least deserve it. But it is a fact that you can't ignore. Now, traditional societies, of course, this is completely irrelevant. Except amongst the elite in certain places. One of the things that Peter the Great did was permit the mixing of men and women in social functions at court. This is the result. Most traditional societies don't permit that. People like to say that, things like adultery and fornication have always been a problem. And, of course, prior to birth control, it couldn't have been. And the fact that in traditional societies, it's extremely difficult for young men and women to be alone that aren't married. That would cause by itself a gigantic scandal. But Peter the Great began to dismantle the strictures regarding marriage and courtship in the early 18th century. Now, it took a long time to filter elsewhere, but the immorality of court circles was notorious. And even worse, the 18th century female rulers, the two Annas, the two Catherines, and Elizabeth, themselves took many lovers, and those lovers wielded great power. So, although the alpha-beta distinction really only matters and only makes sense in, post-1968 America and the Western world in general, there are some exceptions to that. The red pill implies easy access to birth control, social permissiveness, and the gynocentric social order that creates. Not to mention a geographic mobility, such that people are strangers to one another. And of course, it also implies a breakdown of traditional intersexual relationship structures. Now, that being said, we can now understand Tolstoy's novel. Without understanding that interaction, because in this case, in this novel, it's blatantly obvious that the two main women and two main men are, while they're all upper class, while they all seem to be attractive, and the two men that we're going to talk about both have money, they're very, very different in the eyes of women. Anna Karenina's decisions seem irrational without understanding the alpha-beta distinction. So commentators have a tendency to force some ideological purpose onto Anna's actions. Now, the other woman involved is Katerina, or Catherine Shtcherbatskaya, who's only 18 years old. And Anna and Kitty is her in Katerina's nickname. Anna and Kitty both fall for Vronsky at the same time. And his alpha status is the whole structure of the book. So you have an 18-year-old aristocrat, Kitty, and Anna Karenina, who of course is married, both fall in love with Vronsky, the archetypal alpha. And the fourth character is the other man, and that's Konstantin Levin. That is Vronsky's opposite. He is very awkward. He's always rejected. He is meant to be the obvious beta. He was a great provider. Although, again, both men do have money. All these men are wealthy. All the women are attractive and desirable. See, the key point is because the alpha is so rare, women will destroy each other in competing for them. No one gets jealous because you have a beta on your arm. And this is the whole dynamic of the novel. Without this understanding, it doesn't make sense. Now, in essence, Vronsky is supposed to marry Kitty. But he ends up having an illicit relationship, an adulterous relationship, with Anna, who's married. Anna, who is much older than Kitty, has a tremendous charm over men. But she is getting to the end of her youthful beauty. And she sees competition for people like Anna as a threat. Like Kitty as a threat. And when Vronsky rejects Kitty's advances and runs to Anna, Kitty hits her so hard that she has to go to a sanitarium in Switzerland just to get away. Being rejected by an alpha is a horrible experience for a woman, and sometimes they'll switch to betas just to avoid any possible pain in the future. The embarrassment of being with a beta is nothing compared to the pain of an alpha rejection. But as it seems to be, the wealthier the beta is, the more tolerable he seems to be. But the very fact that Anna Karenina, the title character, is committing adultery in 19th century Russia shows just how alpha Vronsky is. Now, today it's a daily event, but back then it was a gigantic scandal. Now, the beauty that the sexually liberated upper classes in Petersburg, a beautiful woman there, the attraction that she gets, the attention that she gets, poisons her. And that's Anna's problem. Now, Anna's married, Anna Karenina. Of course, remember, last names are gendered in Russian. Alexei Karenin, who's a count. He doesn't seem to be much of a beta, though. He's confident, he's wealthy, he's high-ranking, but he is much older than she is. The problem is because he's so much older, he doesn't have much of a sex drive. And it doesn't occur to him that this may be a problem when you're married to a woman that all the men want. But Karenin is from a different world. He's from a traditional world. The elite in Petersburg at the time were sexually liberated. The church was losing their grip over these people. I mean, the peasantry and the merchants was another matter, but for this, the court circles, high-ranking aristocrats, you did have a collapse in sexual morality, thanks to Peter and the court of the 18th century. Karenin is depicted as very rational, very well organized, dedicated to his career, but that has nothing to do with any matter of the heart. Anna will then deliberately pursue Vronsky, although she's married to this very powerful man. And this is why her husband doesn't understand. He's living under a much older set of assumptions. Because this is a relatively new phenomenon, it's hard for men to develop any kind of defense against it. So again, the so-called sexual freedom is nothing more than slavery to passion. And again, the novel is a warning against the sexual revolution. And certain anarchists and Marxists were preaching this at the time. But even the sexual revolution in America in the late 60s was spurred on by elite action. But it does have its roots in the French revolutionary salons, certain radical sects of Protestants, some Gnostic groups who had a community of wives and stuff like this. It does have precedents, but only in relatively small and closed groups. Now, feminists have a tendency to depict Anna as a heroine because she is pursuing her desire against the strictures of aristocratic society. But this is ridiculous. She's a destroyer. The very fact that she kills herself, which is, of course, the anticlimax of the book, is really not exactly something positive. It's not tragic. It's normal. That's what someone like that does. She's a destroyer. The impulses that she shall have hurt many people. Karenina, her husband, has harmed nobody. But Vronsky's alpha status is so powerful that Anna was willing to destroy that marriage and abandon her child for this guy. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that she's a feminist icon. Karenina is destroyed as a result of this. Now, what he does when he finds out about this, he challenges Vronsky to a duel, but then backs down. Vronsky's a military man, much younger. He doesn't think he could win. So he does back down from the possibility of a duel. But Karenina was more dependent on his wife than we realize. And so when Anna is depicted as a hero or a heroine, this is often forgotten. He doesn't have a huge support system. His relationships are professional ones, not personal ones. So his personal connectedness comes through his wife. And of course, Anna knows this. So in going after, and this is the case for any woman who goes after an alpha who's married. And I think at this point, adultery in the West is almost universal. Because again, women are not marrying the men that they really want. But their drive for alphas doesn't go away just because they're married. So adultery is actually built in to any social system, any marital system that comes into existence after the sexual revolution. And what begins to happen is that Karenina starts to fall apart. And this is something that often doesn't develop and doesn't show up in commentaries on the book. Normally, commentaries on the book are stupid. It talks about the hypocrisy of society ladies or Anna's self-discovery or, challenging tradition and things like this. And one of the other things that comes up is the so-called double standards, which is absurd in this case. That Anna is shunned by high society because of her blatant adultery, yet Vronsky is accepted by it. Except that when you say this, they tend to forget what she's done to her husband, and not to mention abandoning her kids. Karenina has spent most of his time building a brilliant career. But at the same time, there are some people with better connections who get promoted over him, and it takes a huge swipe at his confidence. Now, once Anna leaves him, and I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but then his misery becomes absolutely repulsive to everybody. So not only does he lose his wife, but he's socially punished for the depression that it brings. And he's too old for another woman. He's set. But the alleged double standard is that men who have a lot of sexual partners are considered studs, while women are considered sluts. And allegedly studs being a positive term. Sluts not being a negative term. Now, it's a stupid argument. One of the worst assumptions here is that the sex drives of the two genders are identical. Denying that women are the gatekeepers of sexual access is absurd. It's exactly what they are. But the worst part of that argument is that men and women want the same things. Of course, there's a double standard, because there's no single standard to begin with. Women are the gatekeepers of sex. Men are the gatekeepers of commitment. And again, we're talking about alpha males here. Since sex is absurdly plentiful for even average-looking women, it's worthless. So the double standard argument falls apart. What women are to sex, men are to commitment. So the male version of the slut isn't the stud. The male version of the slut is the guy who says, I love you on the second date. The guy who throws himself at a woman he barely knows. Both the female slut and the male beta throw away what value they have immediately. That's how you know that they have very low value. So the male slut is a needy weakling. So there's no double standard here. There's just never a single standard in the first place. The genders want different things. The term slut has nothing to do with a woman's partner count. It has to do with how quickly she's willing to throw her value away, and her value to a man is sexual. And women realize that the beta male doesn't really love her. He's dependent on her. He's scared to death of going back to the dating market where he could be rejected for years. But the alpha, of course, is not. The other thing to keep in mind is the concept of stud, a man with has had a lot of women and is popular with women, has rarely been a compliment. Russian term, there's been a few Russian terms. Ortopedstrit is, to be vulgar about it, it means pussy chaser. It's certainly an insult. Filibudye, it simply means adulterer. Bobnik is another word for womanizer, and it's one of the less common words for wolf. It denotes a man as being dangerous. Sertsiad means kind of heartbreaker, I guess. Smooth talker, but heartbreaker literally. That's a term borrowed from the West. Volotitia the term comes from the verb to be pulled or dragged, meaning you're under control of your passions, and that the man is weak as a result. None of those terms, those are the terms for stud. In Russian, not one of them is a compliment. Few of them are recent additions to the Russian language. Very recent additions. It only became a term of approval after the sexual revolution. The man who's a stud in traditional societies is seen as unstable and manipulative, and worst of all, incapable of heading a family. So you can't refer to this in 19th century Russia. So not only is there no double standard, but for a man to be called a stud was not exactly a compliment. At the time, the Russian terms for it or every one of them is negative. The man is not to be trusted. Now, that's Vronsky's story. Levin is a landowner, constantly rejected by women. You see, urban aristocratic women get propositioned by landowners all the time, so he doesn't stand out even though he has money. Now, I know his last name, Levin, suggests that he's Jewish. He is not. He is explicitly stated to be Christian. But he's so low in the desirability scale that he even considers marrying a peasant, despite having assets. And Tolstoy goes out of his way to show him as a provider. He brings the newest technology to his farm. And because he's not getting any kind of sexual satisfaction, he throws himself into his work as a form of sublimation. So a woman attached to Levin would want for nothing except sexual satisfaction. Now, if he weren't wealthy, he'd be an omega, which is the third type of man, which we're not going to talk about here. It's a beta that doesn't provide, in essence. So the fact that he wants to marry a peasant woman suggests that he's just desperate. But he works side by side with his peasants. He's a populist aristocrat. He has no pretensions. And that's the one thing that makes him stand out. But Kitty is seen with him on occasion, because Vronsky has rejected her. But Kitty's sister explains to Levin that he's her safety guy. If the Vronsky thing doesn't work out, she'll go to him. He was a plan B, so to speak. Because he's been rejected by Vronsky, her rank begins to fall, despite her young age. Her confidence is shattered, her self-esteem goes down. And when that happens, she changes her tune about Levin. She even says she's grown so much, which is a common claim among women rejected by alphas. It's a very common refrain today. Taming an alpha, of course, is the ultimate desire, but it can't be done. Now, I have the feeling, I'm not saying that Kitty was having sex on the sly. It was very, very hard to do at the time. As I said, men and women to be alone together who are not married is very, very difficult. And it would be itself a huge scandal. And don't forget, a society that isn't driven by sex doesn't provoke the sex drive like it does in 2020 America. You know, this society is so ludicrously sexualized that, every billboard, every commercial, every sporting event is sexualized. You know, women flaunt their assets everywhere. and then complain about being objectified. But prior to this era, the sex drive was at least dampened because you don't have the constant provocation. So things like fornication and adultery were far, far less and weren't even considerable problems prior to 20th century America, second half of 20th century America. But in these elite salons, you do have wife swapping and things like this. But the only way that Anna can get away with adultery is to throw herself into it entirely. You can't hide it for very long. These are small communities. Now, because Anna's husband has been abandoned, he then seeks a divorce. And as an innocent victim, he has the law on his side. But he still has to prove her adultery, which he fails to do. And Karenina starts going to, as he starts to decay, he goes to some of these fortune tellers. And this is another way of showing how the church has lost its grip on the high-ranking elite. And even reason is losing its grip on the elite. The mystic's name is Landau, which suggests that he is a Jew. And just trusting these soothsayers shows just how far this man has decayed. And then he forgives Vronsky. Anna becomes very sick. She gets pregnant. Anna's very sick during this pregnancy. Thinking that she's going to die, Karenina forgives him. And Vronsky is so shaken by this that he does consider killing himself. The guilt is over. He's no narcissist. The guilt becomes overwhelming. When Anna recovers, she's madly in love with Vronsky, and the more that she falls in love with Vronsky, the more repulsive her husband seems to be to her. When a woman is cheating, it's normal. When a woman is cheating, she has every incentive to paint her husband in the worst possible way. They end up, Anna and Vronsky, after they end up eloping in Europe. They live in Italy for a while. That means that Anna is leaving her children for this man. And everything that she knew before. But Anna begins her own descent. Remember, she's much older. She's not older than Kitty. Vronsky and Anna continue their affair abroad. But because Vronsky's still an alpha, Anna becomes paranoid. This is a turning point in the whole novel. And it shows the absurdity of the sexual revolution, even for people that it benefits. And the novel shows that when they do have a daughter, Anna, also named Annie, she acts very cold towards her. She's losing the capacity to love. And she assumes everyone around her is the same way. Adultery destroys love and commitment. Sin has this gigantic repercussion that the modern mind can't consider. I mean, her relationship was born in adultery. So how does that bode well for the future? If Vronsky would cheat with a married woman, why wouldn't he cheat on her? Is she that extraordinary? And Anna's no narcissist either, because she is racked with guilt. Both of these people are. She's destroyed an innocent man. She's abandoned her child. But after she's destroyed her husband, her own descent into madness begins. And the problem is that Vronsky is freer than she is because he's not married. She's dependent on him emotionally, financially, and socially. But because he's an alpha and she knows this, she knows that he's being approached by women every night, especially when she's not present. She's not unique, and she's getting older, and she's also had several children, which makes her less attractive. She begins to go crazy with jealousy. She even needs opiates to fall asleep. His masculine independence, as Tolstoy puts it, is destroying them both and makes Anna self-destructively jealous. And alphas do wreak havoc over society. Vronsky needs female approval. That seems to be his whole identity. It's even more important than his military career. He resigns his military post to pursue Anna, which means that maybe he's not the alpha that Anna thought he was. And Anna, of course, has destroyed her family over this. So either an alpha's going to cheat on her, or he'll fall in love, making him a beta. So she can't win. Now, we understand this problem in 2019. They didn't understand it in 1877. A woman loves the idea of getting this alpha male and taming him. But taming him is to turn him into a beta, to destroy exactly what attracted him in the first place. The other option is that he stays an alpha, in which case he's going to cheat. So no one can win with these guys. Anna certainly, again, because of her age, she's had children. Tolstoy even says she's avoiding children. Doesn't say she's had abortions or anything, which were available but very dangerous amongst the wealthy. But Tolstoy does say that she's avoided having more children because she fears it would make her less attractive to Vronsky. Now, the one big difference between the red pill theory and what's going on in Anna Karenina is that all of these people know each other very, very well. They're not strangers to one another. It's like Adam Smith's Perfect Competition. The buyers and sellers in these relationships know each other very well. Upper class society is a relatively small group and was fairly closed, so nothing was ever hidden. Today, of course, it's different because men and women are approaching each other as strangers. But Vronsky, as an alpha, he seems to want to please women, and short-term pleasure is all he seems to know, and that's his Achilles heel. He can get whatever he wants, and he seems to be unable to commit himself to anything long-term. And Anna hadn't considered this. She was taken in by externals, by his reputation, by his uniform, but she never considered that might be covering something else. This is what Vronsky says in part 1. In his Petersburg world, all people were divided into utterly opposed classes. One, the lower class, vulgar, stupid, and above all ridiculous people, who believe that one husband ought to live with one wife, that he is lawfully married, that a girl should be innocent, a woman modest, a man manly, self-controlled and strong, that one ought to bring up one's children, earn one's bread, and pay one's debts, and various similar absurdities. This was a class of old-fashioned and ridiculous people. There's another class, real people, a class to whom he belonged. It was a great thing to be elegant, generous, plucky, gay, to abandon oneself without a blush to every passion, and to laugh at everything else. That's what Vronsky is saying about himself, which of course is pure self-justification. It's absolute rationalization. It also sounds very modern. So what he's essentially saying there is in chapter 34 of part 1. Says that it's normal for a man to act like him, which is what an adulterer will often say to himself. He wants desperately to believe that his behavior is normal and natural. So now he can justify the humiliation of Anna's husband, but the facade doesn't take long to break. Levin, on the other hand, is a good long-term investment. These two men are very, very different from one another. Because this is not a sexualized society, sex is not his primary goal. It's sublimated through his labor. Kitty and Levin will eventually get married, but we understand that Levin is at most her second choice, and he's aware of this. But Tolstoy says that wedding night, he uses the word unhealthy. And it's a very polite way of saying that he's terrible in bed. Whether he's impotent, I don't know. And his total lack of experience would suggest that's the case. And their marriage is very stressful as a result. Despite being a success financially, he realizes that younger men, especially younger experienced men, can give her more romantically than he can. I mean, and it wasn't a cultural good, though, in the sense it didn't affect someone's manliness. But it was, in certain ways, growing that way. Today, it's the only cultural good, of course. But it is starting to affect how he views himself. And he complains that, I can't work as much because I'm a married man and Kitty's making all these demands on my time. Which means he's gotten his heart's desire, he's married the woman of his dreams, and is miserable. It doesn't make him happy. In other words, a woman can't make a man happy, no matter how wonderful she is. Now, she gets pregnant very quickly, and there's a suggestion that it's not Levin's. It's not explicitly mentioned. But in part 4, chapter 14, It does say something about the birth of a son, which he just assumed it was going to be a son. That on the one hand, and I'm quoting here, on the one hand is happiness so immense and so incredible. On the other, event so mysterious that this assumption of definite knowledge of what it would be, consequent preparation for it, as for something ordinary that did happen to people, jarred on him as confusing and humiliating. But the princess, that is Kitty, did not understand his feelings and put down his reluctance to think and talk about it to carelessness and indifference. That comes very close to suggesting that this isn't Levin's son. And he's offended, he's offended at the trivial preparations of the wedding and the birth of the baby, because he knows that he's not Anna's first choice. Kitty's first choice. And there's probably a very good reason to believe that the baby is not his. Kitty, of course, has this fantasy about what Vronsky must be like. And Levin knows that he can't live up to that. So Tolstoy comes close to saying that this child isn't Levin's. That's why he saw the coming birth as mysterious and therefore humiliating, although it's actually very vague. Levin sublimates his humiliation, though, into his work. When Kitty fails to make him happy, he begins to wonder if anything could make him happy. Getting the woman of his dreams is shown to be absolutely worthless. So to summarize, you have four characters. The two women, Anna and Kitty. Anna's married, becomes an adulteress, and gets divorced. Kitty's rejected by the alpha male and goes for the beta male. Among the two men, the alpha is Vronsky, a military man, and the beta is Levin, despite being wealthy, socially very awkward. And this shows up again and again. Kitty's family comes to spend the summer with them at Levin's estate. And playboy, named Vasenka Veslovsky, flirts openly with Kitty, despite being pregnant. And Levin becomes insanely jealous. The only reason he would be jealous is that he knows that Kitty could do a lot better. He does control himself, though. Veslovsky is kind of a loser type of hot alpha. Vronsky is a winner. Alpha. Veslovsky is kind of like the bad boy type. He's far less responsible. So Levin does confront Kitty because Kitty doesn't seem to be all that upset by this. She acts all offended and assures him of her undying love. And of course, there's every reason to believe that that's not true. Tolstoy actually says this: he already saw himself as a deceived husband who was needed by his wife and her lover only in order to provide them with the comforts of life and with pleasures. In other words, he's convinced of Kitty's adultery, and it came at his expense in more than one way. Levin wants to be a decent man. He knows that jealousy is beneath him. So he arranges a hunt with the family, and because he's so nervous about the whole thing, he shoots very poorly, which of course increases his insecurity. And because of this, he will eventually throw Veslovsky out of the house in a jealous rage, which earns him tremendous mockery because this is beneath the dignity of an aristocrat. He knows Kitty would rather be elsewhere. He knows Kitty doesn't see him as really anything other than a provider. Now, Veslovsky is clearly guilty and deserves it, but amongst aristocrats, that is not how you behave. So the Vronsky-Kitty relationship follows the alpha-beta clearly, very clearly. Levin is wealthy, but unskilled with women. Anna is attractive, but because she was rejected by Vronsky, runs to the wealthy beta. So at least I won't get rejected. Anna gets pregnant. I don't believe it's Levin's. But the very fact that even pregnant, she gets hit on by some of these aristocrats suggests that she's very attractive. That means Levin knows that she could have done a lot better than him. And that's a horrible position to be in. I mentioned Troy Francis, who wrote a very brief article on this subject before. Here's what he says. Anna's eventual suicide, motivated by Vronsky's slow emotional detachment from her, is a tragic consequence of her hypergamous instinct and a chilling reminder of the power of an alpha presence has to make a woman forsake her family and finally derail her life. There is no doubt that this is true. But in Russia, at the time, this is a very new social phenomenon and confined only to the wealthy. This is a direct result of English influence, and Anna is shown always reading English books. England was in the midst of her industrial revolution, which was destroying all social bonds. Money became the god of the elite, Darwin became his prophet, and the lower drives, both greed and sex, were granted respectable status. So that's the English connection there. So the entire novel is a contrast between the two couples. Anna was somewhat of an alpha female, but her star is falling very fast. The more jealous she gets, the more Vronsky pulls away. If Vronsky breaks up with her, that means she's destroyed her family for nothing. And of course, Levin, the insecure beta male, is with an attractive, much younger female. Neither couple ends up happy. And one thing that Tolstoy points out is that the tradition of the peasantry doesn't have this problem. The peasants are far happier than the aristocrats are. With them, sexual attraction was never the issue in marriage. That's a postmodern concept and probably the worst foundation to create a marriage. That's why Levin romanticizes the peasantry. Levin's was a marriage based on anything but attraction. Kitty, I guess, comes to like him more or less, but there's no question that she's dissatisfied. Now, we know Levin's going to stay with her forever because he could do no better. But because Kitty had her self-esteem broken by Vronsky's rejection, that's the only reason that she ends up marrying Levin at all. The fact that Veslovsky may well have been her lover, and we don't know this for a fact, but even be the father of a child, he knows that he's going to have to deal with this for the rest of his life, at least until Kitty gets too old to have looks anymore. Again, she's probably at this point 20. In other words, Kitty's sex drive won't go away just because she's married to Levin, just because her unattractive husband has money. It just takes the right man to spark it. And when it happens, it becomes almost impossible to resist. The very fact that Anna is willing to throw everything away for Vronsky, and of course Levin knows this, he knows that Kitty may very well do the same thing, which is why Veslovsky is thrown out of the house. No commentator has ever dealt with this before. That's the only way to understand this. The enforced social functions of, all the balls and gatherings of high society is a very social group. It places these women in the company of elite military men and wealthy people that would never have happened before Peter the Great. That's why Veslovsky is so much more significant than commentators have understood in the past. Levin has every reason to be jealous. Adultery was fairly rare until recently in Russian society, so Russian males had very little defenses against it. But this is what Tolstoy is trying to do. He's creating a defense against it. Adultery was very difficult. Without birth control, the social sanction, the tremendous social risks involved, the only way to cheat on your husband really is to be totally committed, like Anna did. Anna abandoned everything because it's impossible to hide. Kitty may be different only because her husband is clueless. He just doesn't understand women, but I think to some extent he's learning quickly. The worst part of Anna's abandonment is that she destroys her ex-husband, who was just the opposite before that. He was a very good man as far as anyone's concerned. And don't forget, of course, sex was a way to blackmail elite court aristocrats for a very long time. So they miss these points. They don't understand how alpha and beta work and what hypergamy is. Of course, Kitty, if Vronsky showed up on his estate, Kitty would run to him immediately. So commentators talk about things like, the double standard or the hypocrisy of society ladies or whatever. They don't seem to have any ideas why Anna would abandon her family for Vronsky. If you don't understand how women are, it's irrational. So they speak in abstractions. They refer to things like self-fulfillment. And that's a way to justify their own revolutionary society. But you see how Anna tries to justify the destruction of her husband by convincing herself that he's repulsive. So commentators will look at Anna's suicide as a horrible result of social hypocrisy, rather than what it is, which is Tolstoy's own revulsion against elite sexual liberation. So at a very early time, Tolstoy is talking about what the sexual revolution means. Now, the postmodern West is unique because it's the first society to institutionalize this and defend it ideologically, to promote sexual liberation en masse. Prior to that, you only saw it in extremist political groups, revolutionary groups, or factions of the very wealthy elite, and it's used to further their agenda. Russia's interesting because it was an intensely traditional society with an elite very much alienated from the body of the people. Sexual immorality is one of the reasons the poor despise the wealthy. The sexual revolution was a plaything for the wealthy only. Anna kills herself because she realizes that she has destroyed her husband and abandoned her child for nothing. Anna realizes that no relationship that's created by adultery could ever work. If Vronsky's going to cheat with her, why wouldn't he cheat on her? She's just had a very rough pregnancy, as I mentioned. So Vronsky now is looking for younger women. Or at least she surmises that. As I mentioned, Anna is avoiding pregnancy, although the method she uses isn't mentioned, because having more children would hurt her chances with keeping Vronsky around. Anna ends up becoming completely dependent on this man, not just financially, but also emotionally. This is what happens when you think that the alpha male is going to be this great partner. And Anna's suicide comes from the destruction that her hypergamous instinct has created. Again, she can't win. If he remains an alpha, he will cheat. That's what alphas do. If he ends up being tamed by her, he's not an alpha anymore and therefore not attractive anymore. But you see how Vronsky justifies his social life. That people who follow traditional values are ignorant. They're stupid. It's also said throughout the novel that Vronsky's family achieved aristocratic status by deceit. So everything about this guy is negative. He is considered, despite being a military man, he is considered to be a bad boy of sorts. This family is almost like the black sheep of the aristocracy. He refers to traditional people as old-fashioned and ridiculous. And he associates being elegant and generous with, as he says, to abandon oneself with a blush, without a blush to every passion, and to mock everything else. This is how he justifies it. But the very fact that he was willing to kill himself when Anna's husband forgives him suggests that he doesn't really believe that. Sexual revolution has tremendous consequences. When I read one feminist article after another on Anna Karenina, acting like she's a tragic hero, I cringe, because it shows you that they don't understand anything. They don't understand why Anna would do what she did. She wanted for nothing. Her husband was well respected, was a good man. The only reason that she abandons her husband is because of her sex drive, which apparently is very high. The prediction, therefore, is that Kitty will eventually abandon Levin. But because they're both dependent on the men, that's very hard to do. So the only person that can actually take Levin's place would be someone like Veslovsky, because he does also come from an aristocratic family. And Levin is always looking at the peasantry as the alternative to the Petrine elite's sexual license. This whole notion of the emotional states that we consider love, which is not what love is, by the way, physical attraction, that somehow is the reason people get married, is absurd. Peasantry look at utilitarian purposes for marriage, not these emotional purposes, because these emotions come and go. But the fact that Anna was willing to throw everything away for this guy shows Anna as completely irrational, refusing to see what consequences this may bring. And when she does see it, she dismisses it because her husband somehow deserves it. But Vronsky, to some extent, because he resigns his military commission to be with Anna, suddenly he's not so alpha anymore. She can't admit that, because if she admits it, it means that all of her actions have been in vain. And I like the idea of Karenina going to the Jewish mystic, because it shows yet again that the church is becoming more and more irrelevant to this super elite group. Sexual revolution is too much for the powerful. It's too much to resist. And it can be used for blackmail. That does not come out in Tolstoy's novel, but certainly it happened. It happens all the time. Anna is extremely irrational. She kills herself because she realizes that she simply can't win. They don't believe what they say. Vronsky does not believe that traditional values are absurd. He really doesn't believe that. Anna doesn't believe that her ex-husband is a monster. She doesn't believe that either. But this is what they have to say in order to justify what they've done. Even Levin throwing himself into his work is an act of sublimation. In other words, he's trying to transform the sexual energy into something else. And as Freud would, Freud used the term, Jung used the word sublimation to refer to this. When you rechannel the sex drive into other forms of labor. Now, I think that's a bit simplistic, but Levin is trying to avoid the notion that Kitty has probably cheated, at least will cheat in the future, and that he is nowhere near Kitty's first choice. And that's very, very hard on him. So that's essentially the structure of Anna Karenina from Tolstoy. And it's extraordinary because it may be the very first place where these issues have been raised in such sharp relief. Now we know why Anna did what she did. Very few other people have grasped this. Without understanding the alpha-beta distinction, Anna is completely irrational. But in her mind, the exact opposite is true. Anyway, thank you, my friends. Thank you for listening. Happy New Year. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.